She stood at the edge of the sidewalk like a statue carved from shadow, the city rushing past her in blurs of light and sound, but none of it reaching her. Not really, because her world had no color, no shape, only the rhythm of her guide dog's breath and the icy pressure of strangers' eyes. Elissa tightened her grip on the harness, exhaled slowly, and faced the tall glass doors of the boutique like it was a battlefield, knowing before she even moved that something was wrong, not just the silence. Inside, not just the way the security guard shifted his stance like he was bracing for something dirty, but the way the air itself seemed to thin, stretched tight with invisible judgment. And when she took a step forward, she felt it. The wall, not of glass, but of intent. His voice a calm, practiced sneer. "Sorry, miss, no animals allowed." But that word animal sliced deeper, slicker, more poisonous, like it wasn't the dog he meant, and she heard it in the hesitation. The way he didn't say, "guide dog," didn't say assistance, didn't care to ask, just that firm tone, trained to sound professional, but soaked in something rotten. She tried to explain quietly, with the calm of someone who's had to do this before, again and again, but his body had already turned half away, dismissing her presence like a smudge on the window. Behind him, the boutique gleamed like a dream in marble and gold, filled with perfume and polished people and mannequins in $1,000 silence. But none of it. For her, no one moved to help. No one opened the door. No one even looked at her. Like she was a glitch in the scene, a static interruption in their curated world. And the most awful part, the truly awful part, was the part of her that expected it. The part that was tired, not of walking blind, but of walking unseen. And as the cold wind pulled at her coat and her dog whined softly at her side, she realized she wasn't just outside the boutique. She was outside the line that decided who mattered and who didn't. The second she turned away from the door, something cracked inside her. Not loud like broken glass, but quiet like dignity snapping under weight. And though the sidewalk teemed with life, no one met her face, no one stopped. Not even the woman who nearly brushed her shoulder as if Elissa were just air. And the worst part was how normal it felt. Like the city had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, and everyone knew their lines. The security guard stiffening behind her like he'd done his job. The staff inside pretending not to notice the way the dog's paws trembled. The way Elissa's fingers gripped the harness like it was the last string keeping her together. And somewhere in the background a voice laughed. Someone's podcast, someone's phone, someone living in a world where this wasn't happening. And Elissa stood there frozen in place, her lips parted like she was about to speak, but couldn't decide if it mattered, because what could she say that hadn't already been said by hundreds of others who came before her, black and blind and dismissed in plain sight. And the dog nuzzled her leg as if asking permission to go. And that was when she heard the soft click, the unmistakable sound of a phone camera from somewhere behind. Someone filming, not to help, not to intervene, but to catch the spectacle, to own a slice of her humiliation, to share it like a digital souvenir. And that was the moment her throat burned, not from shame, but from fury, raw and rising and hungry. And yet, she swallowed it. Swallowed it like bitter ash, because she knew that anger from someone like her would only confirm their story, their stereotype, their reason to shut her out. So instead she turned, slow and composed like a soldier retreating under fire, and walked away, every step a war against the scream clawing at her ribs, the scream that said, "This isn't over. This will never be over." And somewhere behind her, the boutique door finally hissed open for someone else. Someone allowed. She walked, without knowing where she was going, not because she couldn't see, but because nothing in front of her felt like it wanted her there. Every corner of the city suddenly sharper, colder, as if it too had watched the video and silently chosen its side. Her dog led with steady discipline, but even he seemed slower, hesitant, as if sensing the tension wrapping around her like a noose. And as she crossed the street, a car honked, not in warning but in disgust, slowing just enough for someone inside to yell, "Watch it, lady! Train your mutt!" and the word lady landed with sarcastic spit, like a word stretched around something uglier, and Elissa felt the same cold eyes on her as she always had, in stores, elevators, waiting rooms, that slow, calculating scan, black, woman, blind, stacked like offences, like reasons to avoid, and she remembered the job interview where the panel smiled too much and said, "We admire your strength," then never called back, or the dinner where someone touched her braids without asking and said, "You're so articulate," as if surprised her mouth could form sentences. And now here she was again, invisible and exposed all at once. Her pain dressed up for public consumption because someone had posted the video, of course they had, and it was already spreading. People debating in comment sections about whether she had played the victim, whether she was faking blindness, whether it was even about race. Someone wrote, "She got in her feelings over a dog," and another replied, "They always make it about them. Not they as in women, not they as in blind, but they as in her skin, her history, her mere presence in a space not meant for her." And as she scrolled blindly through the automated voice reader on her phone, each comment hit like a slap from an unseen hand, and she realized with a nauseating calm that the world didn't just want to reject her, it wanted to erase her, kindly, efficiently, with a smile and a public statement later. And, in that moment standing at a bus stop that wouldn't come, Elissa felt something collapse that she hadn't even known was holding her up, like whatever fragile hope she'd carried all these years had finally caved in under the weight of being polite, of asking nicely, of existing where she was never invited. Let's pause for a brief moment. If you're listening right now, let us know in the comments. Where are you tuning in from? Have you ever experienced anything like this, or seen something similar happen to someone else? Your stories matter, and if this journey has caught your attention, don't forget to follow so you don't miss what comes next. We continue. The night passed, not like a shadow, but like a wound that stayed open, pulsing with every new notification, every share, every twisted caption that took her pain and dressed it up for entertainment. By morning, the video had exploded, her image frozen, mid-sentence as if her silence spoke louder than her words ever could. And now she was everywhere yet still nowhere, her name unknown, her voice unheard, just a thumbnail in someone else's outrage reel. Commentators used her to fuel their narratives. Activists posted her as proof. Brands ignored her, and strangers debated her humanity like a product review, arguing over whether the dog was necessary, whether she was overreacting, whether the guard had a point. But the boutique said nothing, not a whisper, not a line, as if hoping the storm would burn itself out while they sipped coffee behind locked boardroom doors. And Elissa sat in her apartment alone, curtains drawn, though she couldn't see the light anyway, phone vibrating with attention that didn't feel like support, but exposure, like standing naked under 1,000 judgmental eyes, her inbox flooded with offers to speak, to interview, to relive it all for views, and her chest tightened with every message starting with, "As a fellow, person of color," or, "I'm so sorry this happened, but..." None of them saw her. They saw a moment, a headline, a woman made of symbols, not skin. And it wasn't until hour 24, almost exactly, that the boutique finally broke its silence with a post so sterile it read like a spreadsheet. "We are aware of the incident involving a guest outside one of our locations. We regret that this experience did not reflect our values. The individual responsible has been suspended. We are reviewing our policies." No mention of race, no mention of disability, no mention of her. Just a vague brushstroke of apology, crafted to survive legal review and pass the blame downstream. And as she listened to the text read aloud in its lifeless tone, Elissa didn't cry. She just laughed once, sharp and low, because the silence had spoken, louder than any of their words ever could. And now the world had moved on to something else. Another scandal, another headline, while she was left behind again. Not erased, but blurred. And maybe that was worse. Elissa sat on the edge of her bed, the screen of her phone glowing in the dark, the world outside so quiet it felt like the city itself was holding its breath. A soft buzz echoed in the stillness. Another message, another notification. She had stopped reading them a few hours ago. The anger, the guilt, the desperation, it all had mixed into a bitter cocktail she couldn't drink anymore. But even the silence was louder than before, louder than any of those voices, because now there was only this hollow feeling of being forced to live inside a story that wasn't hers, being pushed to wear a face and an identity that didn't fit, didn't reflect her truth, not the way she wanted it to. The boutique's apology was out there now, like a whitewashed billboard meant to shut everyone up. Not a word about her, not a word about race, not a word about anything but a vague reference to a guest experience. The post was as empty as the air around her, designed to protect their brand, not her dignity, not her humanity. It was almost comical in its lack of substance, like they had sat in a room and collectively decided the best way to handle this was to wash their hands of it as quickly as possible. The individual responsible has been suspended. What did that even mean? Suspended for what? For doing their job too well, for carrying out the discrimination and hate that the brand, the city, the entire system had been building for decades. Suspended. The word sat in her chest like a stone. She didn't expect an apology. She didn't expect anyone to come rushing to her side. But what gnawed at her, what broke her deeper than the humiliation of that moment, was the way everything about the incident was shaped, manipulated, twisted to fit the comfort of others, not her. That was how the world worked, wasn't it? That was how it had always worked. When you were black and disabled, when you were outside the acceptable boundaries of the world they had made, you didn't get apologies. You didn't get respect. You got adjusted, molded to fit into whatever narrative was easiest to sell. Elissa had learned that lesson a long time ago. It was just the way people looked at you, always a little too long, always a little too dismissive, always just enough to make you feel less than human. She didn't need to see their eyes to know they were there. The stares, the murmurs. She could feel it when they judged her, could hear it in the whispers. She had seen it in the way people changed their voices when they addressed her, like she was some fragile creature, something to be patronized, something to be ignored, something to be taken care of. And now it was all falling into place. The words of the apology echoed in her mind. We regret that this experience did not reflect our values. Her values? What values? The ones that only existed when it was convenient. The ones that didn't show up when she needed them most. The ones that only performed for the cameras and the carefully curated press releases. She could feel the heat rise in her chest again. The same old anger. It was getting hard to breathe. The weight of the apology crushed her, but not in the way they thought it would. Not in the way they had intended. No, this wasn't closure. This was the final nail in the coffin. They didn't care. They never cared. Not about her. Not about what happened. Not about how her life had just been reduced to a headline. She closed her eyes, trying to push the screen away, trying to forget the cold emptiness of the words. But it wasn't just the apology, it was everything else that came with it. The way society had always shaped her into something less than whole. The way everything about her had always been seen through a lens of suspicion. There were the comments under the post. Of course, the same old racist lines, the victim mentality accusations, the "why don't you just get over it" posts. One person even went as far as to claim that people like her were just looking for handouts. Another said, "She's just mad she didn't get what she wanted." She let out a bitter laugh, a laugh that sounded almost like a sob, because those words weren't new. They were so familiar. It was sickening. People like her, just looking for handouts. They didn't even see her. Not her, Elissa. Just what she represented. Just her skin. Just her blindness. Just the story they thought they knew, the story they wanted to know. The reality was too much, too ugly for them to stomach. So they twisted it. They reshaped it into something they could handle. She could almost feel her body shaking as she reread the post one last time. The individual responsible has been suspended. Suspended. A slap on the wrist for someone who had been part of the system that allowed this to happen. A system that had built its very foundation on excluding people like her. Suspended. For what? For showing the world exactly what this society had always been. For doing exactly what the world had taught them to do. To shut people like her out. To make her feel less than. She should be angry. She should scream. But instead, she felt this heavy, suffocating sadness. The kind that pressed against her chest, like the weight of 1,000 people who had all stood in line, one after another, to stare at her, to judge her, to condemn her for existing the way she did. She dropped the phone onto the bed and stood up, walking slowly toward the window. It was dark outside, but she didn't need to see it to know what was out there. She knew the city. She knew the streets, the faces, the noises, the smells. But tonight, everything felt different. The city felt colder, sharper, and emptier. Her thoughts felt too loud, her anger too big, and the world outside, the people walking by, none of them even knew she was there. She had never felt more invisible in her life. Invisible. It wasn't just the boutique that had failed her. It was the world. It was everyone who had seen the video and moved on to the next distraction, the next scandal, the next viral story. People forgot quickly. They always did. But not her. She couldn't forget. Not this. Not ever. She was marked by it now, marked by the things they couldn't see, the things they wouldn't acknowledge. Her anger wasn't just about what had happened that day. It was about everything that came before it. The microaggressions, the stares, the silent dismissals, the lifetime of being told that she wasn't enough, that she didn't belong. This wasn't just one incident. This was years of suffering, of silencing, of fighting to be heard in a world that didn't want to listen. But the anger was only part of it. The rage, the pain, the hopelessness. They were all real. But somewhere beneath it, buried beneath all the years of being overlooked and disregarded, there was something else. Something she couldn't quite name. It was quiet, almost like a whisper in the back of her mind, a small voice telling her that this wasn't the end. She was still here. She was still breathing. And as much as the world tried to silence her, as much as they tried to erase her, she would not disappear. She wasn't going anywhere. As she stood there, her hands shaking, she made a choice. She wasn't going to let them define her. She wasn't going to let their silence be the final word. Not today. Not ever. The world could apologize all it wanted, but she would not be swept under the rug. She would not be dismissed again. This wasn't the end of her story. This was only the beginning. The morning after the boutique's hollow apology felt like waking up in a room too small for the weight pressing down on her chest. Elissa had always known how to survive the world. She had to. It wasn't just the blindness, it was the world's indifference to it, to her, to everything about her that made her different. Different in a way that made people uncomfortable. And she had learned, early on, to hide that discomfort from them, at least on the surface. But the truth was, every day was a battle. Every time she stepped out her door, every time she went anywhere, store, restaurant, sidewalk, park, it was a negotiation, an ongoing dialogue between her and the world, a world that wasn't built for her, a world that no matter how hard she tried to fit into it, kept pushing her out. That's why when her phone buzzed that morning, with a fresh wave of notifications, more comments, more messages, more offers to help, to interview, to speak on behalf of the voiceless, she felt a sick, familiar sensation wash over her. It wasn't just the sheer exhaustion of being constantly pulled into other people's versions of her story. It was the way they wanted her to speak, the way they needed her to fit their narrative, a victim, a symbol, a moment that could be sliced into something marketable. People who thought they were helping were only reinforcing the same system that had crushed her in the first place. They didn't see her. They saw a headline. They saw a soundbite, a chance to appear empathetic without ever having to truly confront the ugly realities of a world that thrived on inequality. Maybe you should speak out more, her friend suggested when she called later that day. Elissa could hear the worry in her voice. But Elissa didn't need to be told to speak out. She didn't need advice on how to handle this. She had been speaking out her whole life. It was just that the world didn't listen. It never had, and it wasn't going to start now. People want to hear your story, the friend continued. They want to know how you feel, how this has affected you. Maybe you could start a campaign or… No, Elissa interrupted, her voice firm, the anger bubbling up once again. I don't need to start anything. I've already started. I've been speaking for years and nothing changes. This is just one more example of it. She let out a breath, trying to steady herself. I'm not their token inspiration. I'm not here to make them feel good about themselves for a few minutes. But even as she spoke the words, she knew that the weight of the world, the weight of this new attention, was pressing harder. She was tired. So tired. And the pressure, the constant invasion of her space, her thoughts, her life, it was unbearable. Hours passed, and she found herself scrolling through the endless comment threads, reading through the hate, the accusations, the casual disregard. And the pain, the deep-rooted exhaustion, started to creep back in. There were people who said she was milking the situation. People who said, she's just bitter because she didn't get in. People who didn't understand that it wasn't about entering the store. It was never about that. It was about being seen. And they couldn't even offer her that. Even now, after everything, after the incident had gone viral, no one truly saw her. And then there were the messages from people who had no idea. People who had the audacity to tell her how to feel. Maybe you should be more forgiving, one woman wrote. We all make mistakes. You're letting this ruin your life. And Elissa could feel the rage building again. Ruin my life? She thought. You don't get to say that. You don't get to tell me how to feel about my life, about my struggle, about my pain. You don't even know me. You don't know what it's like to be erased, to be treated like an afterthought, to constantly fight for your place in a world that tells you you don't belong. But the silence in her apartment felt deafening, like the world was getting smaller, like her anger was something they could just dismiss with one more dismissive comment or just move on. She slammed the phone down, feeling the heavy thud echo in the silence around her. The truth was, she was tired of fighting, tired of speaking, tired of trying to explain, to make others understand. She was tired of being the one who always had to educate, to forgive, to carry the burden of other people's ignorance. Her spirit felt shattered, and for a moment she just let herself be still. Just let the quiet seep in. But deep down, she knew that silence wasn't an option anymore. Not for her. Not for anyone who had been silenced before her. Not for anyone who had ever been forced to live in the margins. The truth was, she had already fought this battle her whole life. Long before the incident at the boutique. Long before the video. Long before the world had ever decided that her pain was something to be watched from a distance, like a spectator sport. No, this wasn't about the boutique. This wasn't about the apology. This was about something deeper, something older. It was the constant, subtle way people in power had controlled the narrative. The way they had decided what stories were worth telling and which ones should be buried. The way they had shaped her, and every other person like her, into a role that could fit into their version of society. A version that didn't include people like her in the places that mattered. Not the storefronts, not the headlines, not the spaces of power. And so, in those quiet moments of reflection, Elissa realized the true battle was not one she could fight alone. This battle was bigger than any individual, bigger than any viral video, bigger than any boutique's apology. It was about a system that had been rigged from the start to deny her, and people like her, a seat at the table. It was about the unspoken rules of the world that had been shaped by privilege, by race, by power. Rules that no amount of apologies could undo. And yet, as she sat there in the quiet, the weight of all of it pressing down on her, Elissa felt something stir. Something small, but something real. A flicker of determination. She didn't know what the next step would be, or how she was going to continue this fight. But she knew that if she didn't, she would be just like everyone else who had come before her. Another black woman, another disabled woman, swallowed by a system that didn't care. But that wasn't going to be her. Her phone buzzed again. More messages, another offer, another apology, another piece of the puzzle. She grabbed the phone with renewed purpose, scrolling through the messages one by one. But this time, There was no anger, just clarity. She wasn't going to settle for their pity. She wasn't going to settle for their dismissals. She was going to take control of the narrative, whether they liked it or not. They could suspend their employees. They could write empty apologies. But they couldn't silence her anymore. The world was going to listen to her. And whether they liked it or not, they were going to hear her. The next few days blurred into a haze of phone calls, interviews, and emails. The public apology from the boutique had been a spark that ignited something much bigger than Elissa had anticipated, something that moved far beyond the cold walls of a luxury store. The world was paying attention now, not because they cared about her, but because they saw a moment, a spectacle to be consumed. It was all too familiar, too easy to see how people would try to turn her pain into something they could sell. People wanted to see her as an emblem. They didn't want to see her as a woman, a person who had spent her whole life fighting to exist in spaces that weren't built for her. They wanted her to be their cause, their victim, their symbol, and Elissa hated it. Every email she received seemed to come with strings attached. People from activist groups, public relations teams, foundations, all wanting to get involved. They saw her not as a voice, but as an opportunity to rally behind, to make their own statements, to push their own agendas. It was overwhelming, but more than anything, it was infuriating. She wasn't a tool to be used. She wasn't a hashtag to gain followers, or a story to be packaged into something neat and easy to digest. And yet, that was exactly what they tried to do. She had taken a brief break from social media, but it didn't matter. The news outlets were still buzzing with her name, still using her as the poster child for their stories about discrimination, race, and inequality. But what struck her most wasn't the fact that her story was being shared. It was how it was being twisted. People who had never understood the depth of racial discrimination were suddenly playing experts, offering solutions they thought would fix everything. She was asked to speak about what it felt like to be black, to be blind, to be a woman, as though her lived experience could be reduced to a soundbite, something quick and easy for people to sympathize with and move on from. It wasn't just the media either. The boutique's PR team had reached out. Of course they had. They were trying to clean up the mess they had created. They offered a seat at the table, a voice in their campaign for diversity, an opportunity to become a face of change. Elissa could feel the words heavy in her mind. We'd love to have you represent the brand as a symbol of inclusivity and progress. As if being used to clean up their image was supposed to be some kind of reward. As if the systemic issues that had led to her being treated the way she was could be erased by a branded partnership. She thought about it for a moment. That brief, hopeful moment where she thought maybe she could use it. Maybe she could make them see her, make them see the real problem. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how they were playing her, how they would always play her. She would be the token, the woman they could trot out when they needed to say the right thing, the woman they could use to say, look, we're inclusive, we care, we're doing better. They didn't care. Not really. They wanted her as a shiny new toy for their PR department. They didn't want to change the system. They didn't want to address the root cause of the inequality, the racism, the ableism. No. They wanted to use her as a mask, to cover up the rot beneath. One afternoon, she received a direct message from a woman in the marketing department of the boutique, offering a private meeting to discuss a new initiative. Elissa had had enough of these offers. She had been tempted to ignore it completely, but something inside her snapped. She didn't need their pity. She didn't need to play their game. So, she replied, I'll come, but I'm not here to be your token. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment. I'm here to have a real conversation. Don't try to sell me a brand. Sell me honesty. If you're serious, we'll talk. If not, don't waste my time. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. She knew what this would mean. It would mean they'd either see her as an opportunity to fix things, or they'd dismiss her completely. Either way, she wouldn't sit in silence anymore. The meeting was set. When Elissa entered the room, she was met with the sterile smiles of the boutique's PR team, sitting around a sleek glass table. The atmosphere was cold, calculated. They didn't know how to treat her, how to react to her, and it showed. Their discomfort was palpable. Elissa, as always, knew this. She could feel their eyes shifting between her and the others in the room, the subtle tension in the air. They were waiting for her to speak, to make them feel better about the mess they'd created. But Elissa wasn't here to make them feel better. She wasn't here to fix them. She took a seat at the table, her dog lying quietly by her side, and crossed her arms. "Let's talk," she said, her voice calm but sharp. "Let's talk about what happened, about why this is happening all the time, not just to me, but to others like me." One of the women, the head of PR, cleared her throat, her smile strained but still present. "We're deeply sorry for the experience you had outside our store. We want to make sure something like that doesn't happen again." Elissa didn't interrupt. She let the words hang in the air, too hollow to mean anything. The PR woman continued, her pitch rehearsed, the same tired talking points she had been trained to say. "We believe in inclusivity. We believe in accessibility. We want to show the world that we're evolving, that we're listening." Elissa almost laughed. Almost. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice dropping. "You don't believe in inclusivity. You believe in image. You believe in selling a story that makes you look good without actually doing the work. You don't care about accessibility. If you did, I wouldn't have been denied entry to your store. If you cared, you wouldn't have treated me like I wasn't even there." She paused, letting her words sink in. "So, I'm not here for your campaign. I'm not here for your 'we're sorry' speech. I'm here to tell you that the system you've built, the world you're comfortable with, isn't working. And it won't work until you address the real issues, not just the ones that make you look bad in front of the public." There was a silence that stretched on for far too long. The people around the table shifted, uncomfortable, not sure how to respond. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected someone to call out their hollow promises. They hadn't expected to be questioned. Not by someone like Elissa. Not by someone who could see through the veil of their corporate rhetoric. "We're trying to make things better," the PR woman finally said, though her words felt flat, empty. "We want to partner with you, Elissa. We want to make a real change. Be a part of our campaign, and together, we can show people what real change looks like." Elissa shook her head slowly. "I'm not here for your campaign. You want change? Start by doing the work. Start by actually listening to the people you've been ignoring for years. Start by changing the way your employees think, the way your brand treats people like me. Not as a campaign, not as a token, but as equals. You've been selling a lie to the world, and I'm not going to be part of it." The PR woman opened her mouth to speak, but Elissa stood up, cutting her off. "I don't need to be your symbol. I don't need to be your poster child. I'm not here for your progress. I'm here to make you see what you've been too blind to notice." She turned and walked out of the room, her dog following closely behind. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need their campaign. She didn't need their hollow promises. What she needed, what everyone like her needed, was to be seen. Truly seen, for who they were, not for how they fit into someone else's image. And Elissa knew that this was just the beginning. She wasn't done. She wasn't going to be silenced, not by the boutique, not by the world, not by anyone. She was going to make them see her, and she wasn't going to stop until they did. Elissa's phone buzzed again, another string of notifications blinking on the screen like fireflies in the night. But this time, she didn't pick it up immediately. She had learned, over the past few days, to let the flood of messages settle before wading into it. She didn't need to dive into the tide of strangers' opinions that felt more like accusations and pity than genuine concern. The messages were the same as always, people offering support, people offering advice, and the occasional vile comment slipping in between. They all blurred together into a monotonous hum in her head. But she could no longer afford to ignore it. She had to move forward. She had spoken her truth in that meeting, standing tall and saying everything she needed to say. She wasn't just angry anymore, she was determined. But now, as the dust from that conversation began to settle, she felt a strange emptiness. What had really changed? The boutique's PR team had said the right things, promised the right things. But Elissa knew better than to believe in empty words. She knew that nothing would truly change unless the world itself changed. And the world was never going to change for someone like her. Someone who had been born into a society that refused to see her. But something was different. She wasn't the same woman she had been when she walked into that boutique, the woman who had swallowed her anger and her fear. She wasn't going to let this moment be another fleeting news story. She was going to make sure it mattered, and maybe, just maybe, she could make the world see her as something other than a token, a moment, a symbol of the things they didn't want to acknowledge. The days after that meeting felt like an emotional roller coaster. The boutique's apology was rehashed in every media outlet, their commitment to change plastered across Instagram stories, with stock images of smiling, diverse people. But Elissa wasn't buying it. She saw the marketing team's maneuver. She saw how the brand turned her pain into a product, packaged neatly for public consumption. Their so-called change was just a clever marketing strategy to keep the public satisfied. They weren't interested in real change. They were interested in looking good, the same way the world had always been. The people in power, the ones making decisions about her life, didn't really care about her. She wasn't a person to them. She was a brand, a face that they could use to check the boxes for diversity, a convenient figure to show off during their campaign for inclusivity. Elissa thought about this as she stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair. She hated how she could feel the weight of it all pressing on her shoulders. The expectations, the pressure to represent something bigger than herself. She had done it all her life. Every moment in her life had been shaped by the expectation that she would be something. The good black woman, the articulate one, the strong one. She had been forced to perform all her life. Perform for her peers, perform for her teachers, perform for the people who couldn't bear to see her as a person. She had always had to be more than what they saw, always had to work twice as hard to prove that she belonged. But now that the world had taken her pain and made it their own, she didn't know who she was anymore. Was she still Elissa? Or was she just another victim to be used for someone else's gain? She pulled herself together and decided that she wasn't going to let the world decide who she was. She wasn't going to let them define her anymore. She had to do something bigger than herself. She needed to be heard. But more than that, she needed to see the people like her, the ones who had been invisible for so long, the ones who had been told to sit down, to shut up, to just take it. That night, she sat down with her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She had been avoiding this for days, but now it was time to act. Time to make the statement that she had been too scared to make before. She wasn't going to speak for anyone else. She wasn't going to perform for anyone else. She was going to speak for herself. She opened a blank document, and the words started to flow. I've spent my entire life being told who I am, by teachers, by peers, by the world around me. I've spent my life living in a space that was never meant for me, forced to conform to expectations that were not mine. I was told to smile and be grateful, to sit back and let the world happen around me. But I'm not going to let that happen anymore. The words felt good on her screen. They felt like something she had needed to say for years. She continued typing. When I was denied entry to that boutique, it wasn't just about the store. It wasn't just about me being a black woman with a disability. It was about the system that has worked for so long to keep people like me out of spaces, out of power, out of the conversation. And now, I'm here to say that I won't stand for it anymore. I won't be silenced. I won't let them turn my pain into their convenience. Her fingers moved faster now, the words pouring out of her like a dam breaking. She had been afraid of this moment for so long, afraid of speaking out, afraid of what people might think, afraid of the backlash. But now, she realized that the fear was nothing compared to the weight of staying silent. The world didn't need another apology. The world needed to hear the truth. I am not your token. I am not your campaign. I am a person. I am a woman. And I deserve to be seen. I deserve to be heard. And I won't stop until the world sees me for who I am. The final words clicked into place. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. She wasn't going to be passive anymore. She wasn't going to just accept the pity and the empty apologies. She was going to stand up and demand the space she deserved. She hit send. And with that, Elissa knew there was no going back. Her message went viral almost immediately. The post was shared, commented on, retweeted. The response was mixed. Some people applauded her courage, others dismissed her as angry and bitter. Some accused her of trying to ruin a brand that was trying to change. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that Elissa had said what needed to be said. She had spoken for herself, for everyone who had been forced to be quiet for too long. The world had to hear her now. And as the hours passed, the responses continued to flood in. The boutique's PR team reached out again, offering a new round of talks, new promises of change. But Elissa knew better. She wasn't here to be a part of their marketing campaign anymore. She wasn't here to make them feel better. She was here to make them see her, and more importantly, to make them see everyone like her who had been left behind. The next day, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an offer, not from the boutique, but from a non-profit organization that had been following her story. They wanted to amplify her voice, wanted to help her take this movement beyond a viral post. They had been watching her for days, seeing how her words had resonated with so many people. They saw her as someone who could lead a real change. Elissa smiled at the message. It wasn't the fame. It wasn't the media attention. It was the message. The message that she wasn't alone, that there were others who understood what she had been fighting for, and now she had a chance to fight for them. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Elissa sat in the conference room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as she stared at the polished wood table. The room was cold, too cold, and the silence was thick, pressing in on her from all sides. It had been a week since she posted her open letter to the world, the one that had started the firestorm. The world had reacted. Some embraced her words, some condemned them, others dismissed her outright. But what really mattered to Elissa now was what came next. She had spoken, she had been heard, and now the real work began. The meeting she was about to attend wasn't just another corporate apology tour, it was a turning point. She was being asked to speak, but not as a victim, not as an accessory to their inclusivity campaign, not as a brand ambassador. She was being asked to speak as a person with a voice that had been ignored for too long. The non-profit organization had reached out to her as promised. They weren't offering her fame or money. They were offering her something more important, an opportunity to be a true advocate, to amplify the voices of others who had been marginalized and forgotten. They had a plan to bring real systemic change, not just another charity gimmick or a feel-good campaign. The idea was simple but monumental. Create a platform where those who had been ignored could speak for themselves, where their stories would be heard, not manipulated, not turned into another viral moment to be consumed. But as Elissa sat in the room, waiting for the meeting to begin, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more at stake here than just her words. The world, it seemed, was so desperate to silence her, not just in the traditional ways, but in subtler, more insidious ways. They didn't want to hear the truth. They wanted her to fit into a mold that was comfortable for them. They wanted to frame her, to make her palatable, to keep her in the box of oppressed woman standing up for change. But that wasn't her. She wasn't a story to be packaged. She wasn't an image to be manipulated. The door to the conference room opened, and a man walked in, mid-30s, sharp suit, cold eyes. He was the one who had contacted her, the one who had assured her that the non-profit wanted real change. But Elissa wasn't fooled. She had seen too many people like him in her life. The ones who would say the right things, promise the right things, and then do nothing at all. His smile was tight, practiced, like it had been put on and taken off 100 times. Elissa had learned to read people like him a long time ago. "Elissa," he said, his voice smooth, controlled. "I'm glad you could make it. Thank you for meeting with us today. We've been following your journey, and we're impressed by your courage. We believe that you could help us drive real change in this space." Elissa nodded, her expression neutral. "I'm here because I believe in change, but I'm not here to perform for you or anyone else. she said firmly. I'm here because there are real problems that need fixing. Not just for me, but for everyone who's been ignored, for everyone who's been pushed aside, for everyone who doesn't have a platform. The man, whose name was David, blinked. His smile faltered for just a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. Of course, he said, his tone softening. We understand. That's why we reached out. We want you to have a voice, a real voice. We want you to be at the forefront of this movement. Together, we can create something that's never been done before. Elissa could hear the promise in his words, but she also knew that promises were cheap. She had heard them all her life. I've heard this before, she said, her voice colder now. I've seen the corporate campaigns. I've seen the charity events. I've seen the posts. Everyone wants to jump on the bandwagon of inclusivity, but no one wants to do the real work. No one wants to tackle the systems that keep people like me out. David leaned forward, a hint of impatience creeping into his expression. I assure you, Elissa, we're not like that. We're committed to real change. We want to build a platform that allows people like you to speak, to be heard. Elissa's eyes narrowed. She wasn't going to be placated by well-meaning words anymore. You think I don't know the game? You think I don't see how you've all used me? How the boutique used me? How every single person who asked for an interview, every single person who shared my story, only cared about what I could do for them? I'm not your token. I'm not here to be paraded around to make you look good. David's smile faltered again, and this time, it didn't return. I understand your frustration, but this is different. We want to bring real change. We want you to be a part of that change. Elissa sat back in her chair, her arms crossed. You don't understand, she said quietly. You think this is about me, about my story, about my pain. But it's not. It's about the system that created this. It's about the people who are still being pushed aside. People who will never have a platform like this. People who are silenced every single day, not by the words you say, but by the silence you leave behind. The room was still, the air thick with tension. David looked at her, and for a moment, Elissa could see a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't guilt, but it was something. Something that was too close to the truth for him to acknowledge. He shifted in his seat, glancing away, and Elissa took that as a sign. He wasn't really listening. He wasn't ready to hear the truth. Not yet. Elissa, he said, after a long pause. We believe we can make a difference. We want to use your platform to drive awareness, to raise funds, to create opportunities for others who have been left out. Elissa shook her head. You want to use me. You want to use my story to make money. That's what this is. And I'm not going to be a part of that. Not unless you're ready to put in the real work. I'm not here to be part of your charity event. I'm not here to raise funds for something that's just going to sit on a shelf and collect dust. I'm here because I'm tired of being ignored, tired of being invisible. And if you're not willing to make a real change, then you can keep your platform. David's face hardened, but he didn't argue. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable, until Elissa stood up. I'm done, she said, her voice low but firm. I've been used enough. I've seen enough. I'm not going to stand by while people like you try to make yourselves look good. If you're serious about real change, show me. Show the world. But don't expect me to be your puppet. She turned and walked out of the room, leaving the echoes of her words behind. As she stepped out into the cold air, her heart was pounding. But for the first time in a long while, she felt free. Free from the pressure. Free from the expectations. Free from the constant reminder that she was supposed to fit into a world that never wanted her to begin with. As she walked away, she knew something had shifted. She wasn't going to be the one to fix the world. The world wasn't ready for that yet. But she was ready to keep fighting. She was ready to keep speaking. She was ready to make sure that people like her, people who had been silenced for far too long, would finally have a voice. And this time, she wasn't backing down. The city was quieter than usual as Elissa walked down the familiar streets. She had always found solace in the movement of the world around her, the rhythm of people rushing past, the noise of traffic, the distant hum of conversations she would never fully hear. But today, everything felt muted. The weight of the past weeks hung heavy on her shoulders. She had fought, she had spoken, and still, the world felt too big, too indifferent to truly change. The press, the social media campaigns, the promises of inclusivity and change, they all felt like the same thing to Elissa now. Empty words. People had jumped on the bandwagon when her story had gone viral, but now that the wave had passed, the silence that followed was deafening. The world had moved on to the next big story, and Elissa, once again, was left standing on the edge, looking in. But this time, she wasn't angry. Not in the same way. She had expected the world to forget her, to turn away. She had expected the backlash. She had expected the voices that would try to silence her, to dismiss her as another angry woman, another victim looking for attention. But none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was that she had spoken, and that was enough. Her fingers brushed against the cool metal of the guide dog's harness as she walked, the familiar sense of comfort and control grounding her in the present moment. The dog, her constant companion, moved with purpose by her side, his presence a reminder that there was still love, still connection, still trust in a world that often felt cold and distant. But there was something else in her heart now, something that had been planted in the darkest of places, in the moments when she had felt the most invisible, the most broken. It was a seed of resilience, a quiet but unyielding strength that had grown from the root of every injustice she had faced. It was a quiet understanding that even when the world had tried to erase her, she would continue to exist. She would continue to fight, even if no one was watching. As she reached the intersection, Elissa stopped and stood still for a moment, letting the noise of the street wash over her. She could hear the honking of horns, the sound of people moving in and out of stores, the distant murmur of a conversation. But she was not part of it, not yet, at least. Not in the way she had once hoped to be. A car drove by, the tinted windows reflecting her image back at her for a split second. Black woman, blind, with a dog at her side. She felt the eyes of the driver on her, and she knew, without seeing them, what they were thinking. She had felt it all her life, the judgment, the assumption that she was somehow less than, somehow undeserving of the same space, the same opportunities, the familiar discomfort that always came when people saw her, really saw her. But this time, Elissa didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She held her ground, feeling the weight of the world's gaze, but refusing to let it define her. And in that moment, she realized something profound. She didn't need the world to change overnight. She didn't need them to apologize, to recognize her in every space, to give her a seat at their table. What she needed, what she had always needed, was to be seen for who she truly was. Not the story they wanted to tell about her, not the version of herself they were comfortable with. She needed to see herself, to see her own worth, without waiting for validation from the outside world. She had been denied so many times, so many places where she didn't belong, so many doors slammed in her face. But none of that mattered now, because she had walked through the hardest door, her own. Elissa took a deep breath, inhaling the cool air, and continued walking. The world could turn its back on her. It could continue its unrelenting pursuit of profit and comfort. It could keep pretending that everything was fine, that diversity was just a box to check, that inclusion was just another buzzword to be thrown around when convenient. But Elissa knew better now. She knew that the fight for equality, for true inclusion, was never about one moment or one apology. It was about the quiet, persistent resistance against the forces that tried to silence her, to strip away her humanity. And no matter how many times they tried, they would never succeed in making her invisible again. As she walked, the city's noise enveloped her, but she no longer felt like an outsider. She was part of the story, even if it was a story that no one was telling yet. She was part of the fight, even if the world didn't see it. And in that quiet, private moment, Elissa knew she was never truly alone. She carried the stories of every person who had been silenced, every person who had been ignored, every person who had been told they didn't belong. She carried them all inside her, and she would never forget them. Her dog, steady and strong, nudged her hand as they crossed the street, And she smiled, a small but genuine smile. They were in this together. The world could try to break them, try to push them aside, but they would keep moving forward. She would keep moving forward. The city faded behind her, but she knew that no matter how far she went, she would carry the lessons she had learned. The world could change, or it couldn't. But she had already changed, and that was enough. For the first time in her life, Elissa felt something she had never felt before: peace. And she realized that peace didn't come from external validation. It came from within. It came from knowing that she was enough, just as she was, without needing the world to define her. And with that realization, she took another step forward, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. The world might never truly see her, but she didn't need it to. She had already found her place, and that was the greatest victory of all. We'd love to hear what you think about this story. Have you ever experienced something like this in your life? Have you faced moments of racism or discrimination? Your thoughts and experiences are incredibly important to us, and we truly value each and every one of you who listens and engages. Please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this. We appreciate you all deeply. Have a wonderful day, and feel free to share your thoughts by writing the phrase, "I stand for change," so we know you listened until the end.